for elections in the Ireland South constituency. So, Michael, just for the listeners or for the viewers, can you just tell us a small bit about yourself, about the Irish Freedom Party, and about the constituency in the European upcoming next year European elections?
Yeah, sure, Paul. My name is Michael Leahy. I'm an architect and town planner by profession. I've been qualified as an architect since 1981. I set up business in County Clare in 1986. I'm former president of Venice Chamber of Commerce. I've been an employer for many, many years. As I say, I set up business in 1986, and at various times I'd have up to 15 people working for me in the really busy days, much smaller practice now. I was also appointed to the board of More Penalda in 2012 for a period of 5 years, a 5-year term, and then I re-established practice after that and concentrated mostly on planning matters. But I was always interested in business and always fairly interested in politics. Certainly I see the way the country is going with a wide range of issues, including attacks against freedom of speech, mass migration, very strong leftward drift of politics, the whole process of globalization, getting rid of cash in society, and these are all part of a certain process. So to that end, when the Irish Freedom Party was being established, I was a founder member of it, and I joined the party very early on. I became a member of the party very early on, and I was elected chairman of the party in 2020, and that's the position I hold. I did run for election, general election in 2020. But we were caught on the hop. I think we weren't fully prepared for it, and we didn't do very well. I got reasonable, about 2% of the vote, which wasn't bad for somebody in County Clare, which wasn't bad for somebody who'd never been heard of before. We have been heard of a bit more since then, but it's very difficult for us to get publicity. It's the newspapers will not touch us, RT will never mention us. I think my theory on that is that after they reviled Peter Casey during his last presidential bid, they tried to slander him as much as they could, but it worked in his favour. He ended up with 23% of the vote, which was unprecedented for somebody who'd never even been involved in politics. The more dreadful things they said about him, the better he did. So I think they've come to the conclusion that if they want to denigrate a conservative party, the best way to do it is to ignore them, not give them any coverage. So they pretend we don't exist, which we do exist. If, for example, we organise a rally, which they may mention, they will never mention the fact that we organise a spoke at it. So it's very difficult for us to compete in the political landscape, I guess. But the European Parliament does give us an opportunity, because I think it is the European Parliamentary elections are the type of election where people will register a protest vote, where very often they will not vote for somebody or a party that they're very familiar with in a general election or in a local election. I think in a European election, they may well decide to do that. They may well decide to take an opportunity to register a protest. I think very many people are very unhappy at a wide range of factors in the country at the moment. We have identified a number of key issues. First is mass migration. Every town and village in the country is effectively being planted, and mostly with young men, military-aged men. And it's mystifying as to why the government is doing this. It's mystifying why they're bringing so many people in who are clearly not genuine refugees, but they're bringing them in, they're paying them substantial sums of money, often more than any native Irish person would get in welfare. They're guaranteeing many of these people housing, own door housing, within 4 months of their arrival, which is something that Irish people are not going to get and are not entitled to. Now, the government is also adamant that they're going to attack free speech. The so-called hate speech laws are being crafted specifically to attack freedom of speech and to protect certain minorities, which of course will not be minorities for very long, particularly the Islamic religion or a burgeoning population. They're going to be protected. It would be possible to slander Christians or Catholics, but not Muslims. The High Court, a member of the High Court has now been appointed to oversee the literature that will be produced in elections. Ostensibly, this is about preventing misinformation, but what it's going to do is going to ensure that an alternative to the generally accepted narrative is not allowed to be published or is not allowed to be heard. So that is specific. That's a very open and aggressive manner of trying to nobble our elections, trying to ensure that parties such as ours is not given an opportunity to speak. And these systems have massive fines for people. If you're found guilty of this ridiculous crime of hate speech, if you're found guilty of providing misinformation, you can be fined massively to an extent that will bankrupt you or bankrupt your party, or possibly even be put in prison. So it's got nothing to do with free speech. It's purely about eliminating alternative voices. We really do need to be aware that we're heading towards totalitarian Marxism, totalitarian communism. Marxism has got a huge grip on all of our political parties, including those that supposedly conservatives such as Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. They're nothing of the kind. They're essentially Marxist parties who have adopted full-on totalitarian communism that we've always dreaded. We dreaded 30, 40 years ago. It is now very active in Ireland. We also wish to protect Irish neutrality. It appears fairly clear to me that with the arrival of the Ukrainian war in particular, Ireland is being increasingly associated with NATO, as indeed is the European Union being associated with NATO. It's almost now become synonymous. The President of the European Commission has now taken on the role of speaking on behalf of all of the nations and of aligning the European Union with Israel, for example, despite the fact that many of the people and many of the countries in Europe are not very happy with the activities of Israel, would not be unequivocally or unquestionably associated with it. One of the main issues that I find I'm getting great attraction on is protecting children from trans activism and from homosexual pornography in schools and from general pornography in schools. The interference of the state in the rights of parents and the whole process of trying to get kids to believe that they can be a different gender, to encourage them to engage in life-threatening and radically life-changing surgery, often without the parents' consent. This is something that many parents are completely terrified of, and they want to stop. And we're the only party who's saying that, and I think we are getting traction on that. We want to promote rural Ireland, to protect farm incomes. Rural Ireland is being forgotten about. Even as I've travelled around County Clare to some towns I hadn't been in for some years, some of the towns are barely surviving. There's no investment whatsoever being put into them. There's substantial investment being put into this concept of the 15-minute cities. In that respect, we want to end the ridiculous policy of zero carbon. The whole climate change hysteria is not based on science. It is purely a methodology of trying to impose communism, impose the expropriation of property against the people, and that's what it's being used for. We will fight against that. We want to prioritise small business. We will be a low taxation party. We want to get rid of a lot of the very expensive NGOs that are soaking up money from the taxpayer. And a lot of what they engage in is whenever we hold a rally, you will see people who are employed in the NGO going up to demonstrate ostensibly, but it's part of their whole process of employment, so allegedly to promote diversity, but of course there's nothing of the kind. It is to promote division and to promote hatred between incomers into the country and the native Irish population. We recognise the extraordinary pressures that people are under in terms of inflation, massive cost of living increases, and that is primarily generated by the absurd energy policies which have been adopted by the European Union, the complete elimination of carbon, turning our back on the primary source of oil and gas, which is Russian oil and gas, allowing the so-called allied United States to blow up the main source of the pipeline, which fed German industry, and that's leading to very serious economic crisis in Germany. And that's, of course, feeding into inflation. But the whole ridiculous policy of zero carbon, the effort to eliminate production of carbon within 10 to 20 years, that will drive Europe back to the Stone Age. It will lead to massive poverty for people. So those are some of the issues that we're going to fight on. Now, many people would ask, well, two questions they would ask. Is voting for the Irish Freedom Party a wasted vote? But in the European Parliament, we have to remember that 20% of the seats at present are held by Eurosceptic MEPs. Those are people who want to see a return of sovereignty to the nation states. They want to see an ending of the overweening power and the centralised power of the European Commission. And I would imagine that after the next European election, that 20% will be more like 40% and will probably be the biggest single voting bloc in the European Parliament. Now, we want to ally with those parties. I'll be attending a conference the weekend after next week of the European Conservative and Reform Party. And that's a party which contains MEPs like Christian Terres and Christian Anderson, who have spoken out very loudly against the overweening power of the European Union. We want to ally with parties like that, and we want to effect real change in the way the European Union is governed. Personally, I believe that the European Union should be abolished, and I believe that the member states should come together again and hammer out a new trading deal, which is only about trading. and not about interfering with the sexual lives and with the work practices and with the constitutions of individual states. So those are the main policies.
Yeah, Mike, just a question there for you. You're running in the Ireland South constituency. Can you
Yes.
just explain to the listeners what is the Ireland South constituency and what counties does it have?
The Ireland South constituency is a very large constituency. There will be 13 MEPs in Ireland this time out. Last time out, the Ireland South constituency, and the boundaries may change, but it will be all of Munster. And last time out, it also contained Wexford, Kilkenny, Carlow, Leahy, Offaly, and Far Overs Wicklow.